I'm going to order this hearing, an oversight hearing of the Committee of the Whole of the Council of the District of Columbia. I'm Phil Mendelson, Chairman of the Council and Chair of the Committee of the Whole. Today is Tuesday, November 9th, 2021. The time is 11:19 in the morning. I apologize, we're starting a little bit late, and I don't have a good excuse for that, so I hope folks will forgive me. The subject of this oversight hearing is school security in the District of Columbia public and public charter schools. This hearing builds on testimony received at two previous hearings by the Committee of the Whole on October 21st, 2020 and on April 21st, 2021. Those were both roundtables or hearings we had on school security in the District of Columbia Public Schools. Those hearings focused on initial steps being taken by DCPS to implement a new reimagined model of security at its schools and the recommendations to the Police Reform Commission regarding police presence in schools and school security. I want to say that when I say focused on initial steps being taken to implement a new reimagined model, it wasn't that there was a specific model before us and what steps were being taken to implement it, but rather how schools or DCPS was reimagining how it would address security and develop a new model for security. As of today, and I don't mean literally November 9th, but I mean this time of the school year, DCPS has been managing the school security contract for just over a year, taking it over from MPD with the start of fiscal year 2021. And so we're interested in how DCPS has transitioned with control over school security and what steps it will be taken with regard to improving security, changing security. This hearing is an opportunity to hear from DCPS on the changes to the security model and their implementation progress. We have 5 witnesses who signed up for today's test hearing, and then we will hear from DCPS. The record in this matter will be open for 2 weeks. That is, the record will close at 5 p.m. on Tuesday, November 23rd. And with that, I should say that this hearing is on what we call, this is our internal jargon, the B track. There's another hearing going on right now, which is being broadcast live over cable TV. So this hearing is being broadcast live via the Zoom video conference broadcast platform. It is also available live through the chairman's website, which is www.chairmanmendelson.com/live. This hearing is being recorded and it will be available for public view on the next day or two permanently on the council's website, www.dccouncil.us. With that, why don't I welcome the 5 non-government witnesses: William Haith, who's principal at Anacostia High School; Lucas Cook, who's also a principal, I'm not sure what school; Danielle Robinette, who is a policy attorney at the Children's Law Center; Willie Cromartie, who is Director of Government Relations for Security Assurance Management, Inc., which I know is a contractor providing security services; and then Samantha Davis, who's the Executive Director of Black Swan Academy. And although the witness list doesn't say that, she also is a former member of the Police Reform Commission. We're going to have a clock set for 4 minutes. If you're in gallery view, you should see the clock on the top row of your screen. I'm not going to hold you strictly to the 4 minutes, but please be mindful of time. And with that, why don't we begin with Principal Haith, if he's here. I don't see him yet. Why don't we turn to Lucas Cook? And the witness list says that you are a principal, but it doesn't say where. So I'm dying to know. And good morning.
Hi, Chairman Mendelson. This is Lucas Cook, principal of Hardy Middle School. It's good to see you again.
Yes, it's good to see you.
I'll be brief. I think the purpose of my testimony is just to describe our experience with the school funding options that were allotted for us to repurpose school security funds to provide school-based positions as part of the budget adjustment for the past year. I think generally I'd like to preface by saying that I've felt extremely fortunate at Hardy with the security team that we've worked with from the original crew of officers. They've typically been great. We have a good working relationship with them. We find them to be really engaging with our kids. So we had a positive model of school engagement already. What we were allowed to do by taking a portion to I think it was about $58,000 of that funding for that was originally allotted for school resource officers and repurpose it to the school. We actually hired one of the school officers who worked at our school into a school-based position, which has been excellent. She is amazing. She was amazing when she was an officer. The new role that she's in does give us a little bit more flexibility with the things that we can ask her to do. But it's been, I think, a testament to the fact that we had a good staff of officers that were here, and also this allowed us a little bit more flexibility with that position. So in the new role, she's able to do things like parent mediations and parent contact, supervision of students, just in a different way than she was in her former role. And it's really worked out quite well for us. I'm not sure if there's other things you'd like me to touch on. I wasn't given a ton of context for my input other than I think what I just shared. Is there anything else that you'd like me to touch base on?
Well, I'll probably have some questions for you. You don't have a printed statement, correct?
I don't. I only got the notification yesterday and I didn't have time to put together to the printed statement. Apologies.
Okay. I'll probably, after I hear from the other witnesses, have a few questions for you. Thank you for being here.
Sure.
Turn to Danielle Robinette.
Good morning, Chairman Mendelson. My name is Danielle Robinette, and I'm a policy attorney at Children's Law Center. I'm a resident of the district and a former public school teacher. I am testifying today on behalf of the Children's Law Center, which fights so every DC child can grow up with a stable family, good health, and a quality education. With almost 100 staff and hundreds of pro bono lawyers, Children's Law Center reaches 1 out of every 9 children in DC's poorest neighborhoods, more than 5,000 children and families each year. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss developments in school security in DCPS and public charter schools. In previous hearings on this topic and throughout the performance and budget oversight season, Children's Law Center repeatedly testified in support of a 2-part strategy that divests local dollars from the MPD School Safety Division, then invests those dollars in programs that create and reinforce safety in our schools. Our recommendations included increasing investments in the school-based behavioral health program, providing teachers and staff with trauma-informed training and support, expanding restorative justice programming, exploring funding the expansion of credible messengers in communities and schools, and adequately funding behavioral intervention support staff, administrative staff, and behavioral support technicians at each school. While DCPS is the charter sector have made many promises to address these recommendations, we urge this committee to ensure that DCPS, OSSI, and the charter sector follow through on these promises and make the investments necessary to meaningfully address school safety and positive school climates. During the April hearing before this committee, DCPS outlined plans to invest significant resources in mental health, trauma-responsive practices, restorative approaches, and stakeholder engagement in order to reimagine school security. We encourage the committee to ask DCPS for a detailed update on the status of these investments, including utilization and outcome data where available, to ensure that these investments have resulted in tangible supports for schools in SY 21-22. Additionally, the Council took several critical steps towards reimagining school safety and creating positive school environments in the FY 22 budget. We particularly appreciate the Council's commitment to divest from MPD School Safety Division and the investment in the school-based behavioral health expansion program. Both changes, however, require the continued attention of the Council to ensure that they are fully and effectively implemented. The budget process is just the start of meaningful change in our schools. The Council must continue to provide oversight of DCPS, OSSI, and the charter sector, not only to ensure that they are implementing changes with fidelity, but also to quickly spot issues where the budgetary investments are insufficient to meet the needs of school communities. The April hearing on this topic focused largely on DCPS. In fact, among the government witnesses, only DCPS was represented, which is true again today. However, nearly half of DC's public school students attend a charter school. Just as with DCPS, the committee must ensure that charter school security practices do not criminalize students, but instead support a safer environment for all. Leaders of charter LEAs could provide valuable insight into the needs of the 40,000 plus students who do not attend a DCPS school. At a minimum, OSSI and/or the Deputy Mayor for Education ought to be here to present as entities responsible for education in the traditional public and charter sectors. We urge the Council to ensure that DCPS, OSSI, and the charter sector are making the investments in behavioral health services and teacher supports that we need for our schools to be safer for all students and teachers. Thank you for this opportunity to testify, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Robinette. Mr. Is it Cromartie?
That's correct. That's correct.
You're up,
Good
please.
morning. Good morning, sir. Good morning, Chairman, members, and members and committees of the whole. For the record, my name is Willie Cromartie. I serve as the Director of Government Operations for Security Assurance Management, commonly referred to as SAM. SAM is a DC certified business enterprise that has been providing security services at 117 DC public schools since 2017. Our school security workforce consists of 400 unarmed security officers. Nearly 70% of the workforce is made up of DC residents, predominantly females. SAM has continued to collaborate with all stakeholders to support the school environment that is safe and orderly. We are pleased to report that this collaboration has continued during the ongoing transition of management responsibilities from MPD to DC Public Schools. SAM is committed to working with DC Public Schools towards supporting an environment that protects students, teachers, staff, behavior techs, guests, and visitors. Security is a necessity to create such an environment. To that end, our school security workforce has taken part in 2 DCPS-sponsored contract security training sessions focused on transferring culture and climate within DC public schools. Despite SAM's buy-in into partial shift of the security using behavior techs as proposed in the Police Reform Commission report, we, SAM, would be less than, my apologies.
Fine.
Realistic and irresponsible if we were not prepared for what if situations. Noting that our security officers dealing with security incidents daily is a testimony for the need to remain vigilant and ready to address situations that require actions by the security personnel. From our perspective, contract security is more essential than ever during the moments that DC public schools have removed the resource officers. Thank you for this opportunity for sharing our perspectives in this critical issue. SAM security team and I are available to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Cromartie. Clearly you were reading from a statement, but I don't have a copy of that statement. Would you be kind enough to provide us?
Absolutely, sir. Yes.
Okay, and you can email it to the committee.
Yes,
I would
sir.
appreciate that. Ms. Robinette, we do have your statement. That's helpful because you actually didn't read all of it. And so there's a little bit more that we can look at that will be helpful.
We have 4 minutes, Chairman.
I said at the outset, be mindful of the clock, but I didn't say I was going to cut you off. So I do want to ask, when DCPS testifies, I am going to ask some of the questions you noted, Ms. Robinette, and I am told that Principal Hayes is here. So let me get his testimony and then I'll come back to questions. Principal Hayes. And good morning.
Good morning, sir. Well, yes, good morning. If I can just start. So good morning, sir. My name is William Haith. I'm the principal here at Anacostia High School. And what I would like to begin talking about is just key investments that we've made since the removal of MPD inside the high schools. One of our most important key investments has been our investments in the social and emotional needs of our students. Through the research, we know that students can't access learning if they do not engage in any healthy relationships with adults in the school. And so the progress that we've been able to make is by adding supports and additional supports into trauma-informed practices, restorative healing practices, and healing-centered practices for our staff. One of the things I would like to highlight is the fact that we've partnered with the New Tech Network to also support our staff with SEL and trauma-informed practices. And what we know is that this is a key investment for us as we go through our transformation. One of the things that I really would like to highlight and really pitch is the fact that we have implemented a strong investment in our mentoring approach, in which we start to focus on student strengths versus their weaknesses. So now the approach is kind of focusing with what is strong with students versus what's wrong with students. And we've been able to see a significant decrease in student behaviors, especially transitioning from a virtual posture to an in-person posture. During this process, with the flexibility of reducing security officers and adding additional school-based staff, that has allowed us to build on relationships with students, because we can intentionally target the trainings and professional development that our staff need to engage and interact with students, has been something that's been very beneficial for us as a school. Some of the other things that I would like to highlight is the flexibility with the funds in order to reduce security staff and to highlight staff that can come in and that we can train and support in the Anacostia way. And what I mean by the Anacostia way is where we do focus on a strengths-based approach, where our teachers and our staff will be trained in that strength-based approach as well. Those are some of the things that I would like to highlight that we are doing at Anacostia High School, and also talk about some of the funding and how we've used some of those funding.
It sounds like you've completed your statement.
Yes, sir, it is. I have.
Because I am curious about the funding, but let me begin with this. I fear the principals are already overworked, and so I hesitate to ask either of you, that's Mr. Haith or Mr. Cook, for a statement, but if you could provide it, that would be helpful to us. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like each of you were participants in the 18-school pilot last year, which allowed schools, there were 18 schools where they were given some flexibility to redirect some of the security money. Mr. Cook, I think you were pretty clear on that. Mr. Haith, I'm understanding you the same?
Yes, sir. We did have that flexibility.
And so Mr. Cook already said that he took the money and hired one of the former security officers, if I understood correctly. What did you do with the money, Mr. Haith?
So, sir, we actually was able to hire a new assistant principal to oversee interventions and supports for students. And we were able to hire a lower level position that we can deploy throughout the building to support as needed and to engage with students. The most important piece that we were able to do is really train these folks in the Anacostia way, in which we do carry a strengths-based approach with in our training.
So you have a assistant principal who, these are sort of my notes, oversees discipline and incidents and security?
Yes, yes, sir, I do. Mm-hmm.
And then a second person to, if I understood correctly, a lower level person to work on engagement with students and I guess family?
Yes, sir. Engagement with students with a strengths-based approach where they build relationships that really magnify the strengths of students. And we notice that when we magnify the strengths, then they therefore reduce recidivism or additional incidents and things like that.
So, Mr. Cook, I think you said you had $18,000. That's not enough to hire somebody. Did I understand you correctly?
It was about 58,000, Chairman.
And Mr. Hayes, how much?
We had roughly about 112,000, and we were able to move some additional funds to get the second person in as well.
So Hardy still has some security officers. And those would be the SAM, I think that's Security Asset Management. You still have some security officers, Mr. Cook?
That's correct. We still have a sergeant and 2 officers.
And Mr. Hayes?
Yes, we have 2 sergeants and 3 officers.
So in your ability, this question is to each of you, in your ability to repurpose some of the money and hire somebody, do you think that, well, obviously you think that's been good for the well-being of the school, but do you think it's actually reduced security incidents? Who wants to go first? Mr. Hayes.
Okay, since I'm off mute. So I think that it's still too early to give you a direct number, sir. However, just some quantitative data is that, yes, we see that, you know, having someone who is not necessarily in a uniform somewhat gains a little bit more trust with the student. And we see things where they engage in conversation and they're more easily able to deter certain behaviors and things like that because they are building relationships. They are implementing what we call our strengths-based approach. But to give you a direct number in regards to if incidents have been decreased because of it, I can't really give you that information as of yet.
Okay, fair enough. Mr. Cook?
I would probably second what Principal Hayes said. Qualitatively, the experience of having an additional adult in our building who's tasked with forming relationships, engaging students, helping them form relationships with each other, and to Principal Hayes' point, kind of embracing the way that we are as a school and our community building ideas is likely to prevent disciplinary infractions down the line, because if we have 2 students, for example, who are having tension with each other, this individual can help them mediate, talk it out, have restorative experiences that will likely prevent them. I think it's also going to be difficult to track data right now, even in a quantitative way. Obviously, last year was virtual, so we, for the most part, had very few or no incidents. And then this year is also a different year. The return of students, the social emotional experiences that they had could lead to a situation where we see more incidents in students, although it doesn't sound like that's happening at Anacostia, and it's not happening here at Hardy either. But I wouldn't necessarily compare data, even from this year to the year before COVID, as apples to apples data, given everything that our kids have been through. All that to say, though, I would anticipate that we will see a general decrease.
All right. So let me ask you a completely weird question. But in preparing for this hearing, I was looking at some research materials. Do you think that, I'm assuming each of your schools have got metal detectors. Do you think they're effective? And if you want to take the Fifth Amendment, you're welcome to do that. But I'm curious to know what you think.
Yes, I do believe that our metal detectors are protective. I do think that our metal detectors are a major deterrent, and I think that they are very, we do need metal detectors, at least at the secondary level in the high school environment. So yes, sir.
And Mr. Cook?
I'll add on to what Principal Hayes said. I think that they function in part as a deterrent. We actually did a study with my students when I was in New York City as a principal about our metal detectors and whether or not they appreciated having metal detectors and scanned entry. To be blunt, it was a social justice and student empowerment school, and I was anticipating a response that was different than what I got. Overwhelmingly, the students indicated that it gave them a feeling of safety for the most part to come to the building and hopefully know that the preventative measure of metal detectors were helping them be more safe, even if generally they weren't in favor of having like a officer or police presence, so to speak, that specific element, the students at my school in New York City were in favor of. I haven't done that same study here, but I'd be curious to see if the student input would confirm what Principal Haith and I are suggesting.
Yeah, I just want to take this a little bit further. I mean, I think it's kind of an interesting question. I'm looking at this article. It was from the Justice and Prevention Research Center. Looking beyond schools to airports where such devices are used in larger quantities and at greater frequency, there's evidence challenging metal detectors' effectiveness. As recently as 2017, some airports had fail rates as high as 95% on screening checks for weapons. On the whole, the Transportation Security Administration averaged around 80% in failing to identify weapons during metal detector searches that same year. Gives you a lot of confidence when you fly, but I just thought I would ask the question. So let me ask this. Have you in your schools found weapons, either through the metal detectors or otherwise? Mr. Cook?
I'm trying to think of a recent incident where we found a weapon in the school. I can't recall one, but transparently, before I came to Hardy, the year before I arrived there was a weapon found on the campus. That was also coincidentally before Hardy had metal detectors at the school. The year preceding my beginning the principalship here, there were not metal detectors at Hardy, and a firearm was found in the building in student possession, again, the year prior to me getting here. I think that's generally known. The incident was reported at the time. I guess it was about 5 years ago or so. Since then, I can't honestly recall finding a weapon. I would say that periodically what we experience is students who maybe carry a pocket knife or something on the weekend and forget to take it out of their book bag. Sometimes it's for, you know, the feeling of security. For some of our kids are transitioning across the city, and actually a lot of times it's for kids who were using it to do something during the weekend and they just forgot to take it out of their book bag. Beyond that, I can't recall finding any weapons on the school grounds in the past 5 years.
Principal Haith?
Since I've been at Anacostia, no, we have not had a weapon inside of the building. However, our security staff do an excellent job at sweeping the grounds of the building prior to entering the building. And we have found weapons, knives, tasers and things like that hidden behind things outside of school, because the metal detector has been used as a deterrent. So we do run into that occasionally. And I think that, and I do want to highlight the fact that our security staff does a great job at going out and then circulating the perimeter and checking for those types of devices.
So let me ask a couple more questions, or a series of questions of each of the principals. Have you seen any change from DCPS, that would mean from Central, or from the contractor, with regard to security? And by that, what I'm getting at is, for instance, are you aware of any more or different training of the security officers? Are you aware of, or have you received any additional training in restorative justice, or additional behavioral health clinicians or social workers, whether that would be on your staff or access to them, for each of the principals? Have you seen any changes in the last year in this regard?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to, before we move on to the next part, I would like to talk about the security roles and responsibilities at these schools. The officers, they show up and show out every single day. Through the pandemic, the officers have been working 365 days out the year. They have actually confiscated multiple weapons, knives, even weapons. We had a weapon even today was discovered in one of the DC public schools. Our officers, we're up against a pandemic where individuals do not want to come to work because of the pandemic, but also these officers show up because they care about the kids. They want to make sure that these children are safe at all times, throughout the entire day. When their parents drop them off in the day, they want their parents to come there and to retrieve their child just the way they dropped them off. So I think the officers are doing a bang up, stand up job. They're preventing things from getting inside of these schools on a numerous daily basis. We have an influx of pepper spray trying to get into these schools. We're talking about from tasers. We're talking about from knives. We're talking about multiple fights on a daily basis. We're talking about corporal punishments. We're talking about simple assaults that happen in schools. We're talking about the threats. We're still talking about bullying in schools. We're also talking about the vandalism to the schools, sexual assaults that actually happen. And it's a ring of other incidents that actually occurs on a daily basis. I just want to make sure that for the record, that we know that we're doing the best that we can do to keep our children safe here in the District of Columbia and the DC public schools.
Thank you. That is helpful to the record, but let me go back to the question I was asking of the two principals. Any changes with regard to training or with regard to other resources? I think I'd mentioned restorative justice training in that, or resources for that, violence interrupters, social workers, behavioral health.
Yes.
Experts.
So, sir, yes, sir. To answer your question, one, I want to highlight the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, the ONES organization, which is one of our partners that is inside of our building that supports our ninth grade supports. They started supporting our ninth grade last year, and because of that, we did see a significant increase in our ninth grade promotion. I also want to give a lot of credit to the ONES organization for that. I've seen a lot of supports with our security staff in regards to how they're using the melatometers now, how they're using restorative practices when they engage in students now. And one of the biggest helps that has been a change in our security deployment is that we don't have to go through the chain of command to make a relocation of a security staff in the building. So for example, if I wanted a guard to go from the cafeteria to the main entrance, it usually took an act of council to get that done. However, we can the principals have the discretion to make those changes now. And I think that is one of the biggest advantages that we did have, is to be able to reallocate security officers as we see fit within our building. We also have a DBH clinical clinician that reports out to the building, that supports our students. We also have a partnership with the Georgetown Health Clinic that also has a psychologist and a social worker that comes in once a week to support our students. We have, at least at Anacostia, we do have numerous resources of mental health and awareness that come in to support our building, mainly through the coordination of our Connected Schools manager, which is one of our transformation strategies identified by the chancellor and the mayor. So our Connected Schools manager is constantly bringing in resources so that our students can have access to those resources on a daily and weekly basis. Cook.
And some of that is new.
Yes, sir. The training that our security staff is implementing, such as restorative practices and the reallocation at a moment's notice, is new. Yes, sir, that is new. And we also have new melatometers as well that was provided to us this year as well. That is also new.
Well, I think I had got the impression that the DBH resource, Department of Behavioral Health resource, was new as well.
No, that one, no, I'm sorry. I do apologize. The DBH resource is old. That when I say old, it's 3 years old for me. So
and it's continuing. But
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, that's helpful though. Mr. Cook?
Just trying to think about the resources that have been added in the past year or so. I can't speak for obviously the officers training. I'm aware that they have had training, but I can't speak to the content of their training, whether it was restorative. That would be something for Mr. Cromartie to speak to. I can say that our officers, like Principal Haith noted, have demonstrated a lot of increased capacity to be flexible with us. We already had a team of officers that we consider like our family here, but we've had even more latitude with how we can support them and engage them. We've also had an additional position added to our school, a social worker, as part of the behavioral health initiative from, I think it was last year. Ours started, this is their second full calendar year, I believe, or third. But I can't speak beyond that to specific things at Hardy that are new. Those would be the two things that are newest. And then obviously the staff member that we repurposed using the flexibility of the funds to work in that restorative justice position that she's in.
Thank you. Give me just a second here. I do not have any more questions from any of you. Thank you. Your testimony has been helpful, all of you. So you're excused. You can still watch the hearing. However, I don't fully understand all the different rooms that Zoom has, but you're excused from this room, and we're going to bring in the Chief of School Improvement and Supports for DCPS. Thank you. So the next witness is Dr. Brenda Elliott, who's Chief of School Improvement and Supports at the District of Columbia Public Schools. Good morning, Ms. Elliott.
Good morning. How are you, Chairman?
Fine. Your screen says you are Bren Elliott, but I assume that's Brenda.
That's correct.
When you're ready, and thank you for being here.
Absolutely. And thank you for the opportunity. Good afternoon, Chairperson Mendelson and members of the council and staff. I am Dr. Brenda Elliott, Chief of the Office of School Improvement and Supports for DC Public Schools, and I'm honored to testify before you on the critical topic of school security in DCPS. Today, I'd like to share the progress DCPS has made to ensure our schools are safe and welcoming environments. The focus on positive school security supports is an essential part of our work toward becoming a whole child-centered, anti-racist school system where we live out the value of equity in all that we do. When I say whole child, we are referring to an approach of thinking holistically about the social, emotional, and academic needs of our students. With approximately 50,000 students back in our buildings, our plan to ensure the well-being of our students is focused on three key areas. First, we're focused on leveraging multi-tiered systems of support, MTSS, in all schools to proactively create a supportive environment school-wide and anchor the classroom experience and trauma-responsive approaches. Secondly, we were focused on mental health supports. Third, we are rethinking school security to be supportive, not punitive. We're pleased to see that year-to-date suspensions are down significantly. Restorative practices implementation has improved and increased, and overall infractions are down this school year compared to school year 2019-2020, the last time all students were in our school buildings. I would note that similar to nationwide trends, we are seeing an increase in behavior infractions categorized as severe. We are closely monitoring these infractions to best support schools, staff, and students, particularly in the context of the trauma students may have experienced over the past 2 years.
Ms. Elliott, I'm going to interrupt you. Since there's so few of us here at the hearing, I'm going to maybe interrupt you a few times. Forgive me. So,
okay, sure.
Comparative data, you're saying that the number of incidents are down significantly. The number of severe incidents are up.
Yes, that is correct. So we've had a significant reduction overall in infractions, particularly those that result in an out-of-school suspension. But we have had an increase of what we consider or call our tier 4 and 5 offenses. These are more serious offenses. We've had about 40 more offenses or infractions compared to the same time stamp in 2019-20, the last time we were in school. So about 40 more offenses compared to that year.
Thank you. You can continue.
Okay, so multi-tiered systems of supports. We know that the pandemic has left many in our community feeling overwhelmed, and DCPS is investing in strategies that help us better understand and respond to the needs of students and families. This summer, principals and their school level MTSS teams attended a 4-day summer leadership institute focused on key practices that support a whole child, strengths-based approach to student supports. These practices include ways to support acceleration and engaging instruction for all students, as well as provide more customized, intensive supports for students based on demonstrated needs. DCPS has continued the implementation of trauma responsive schools, TRS practices this school year after a year-long training series during school year 2021. Our 5 TRS non-negotiables, which are the foundations of Tier 1 behavioral strategies, include building relational trust, greeting students with positive and affirming language, addressing staff wellness, providing opportunities and space to practice emotional regulation, and teaching, modeling, and reinforcing school-wide behavior expectations for students and adults. Our goal is to ensure that all students are physically and psychologically safe so that they can fully participate in academic learning. Mental health supports. As I shared last spring, DCPS is a national leader in mental health investments with a total of 131.5 school psychologists, 237 school social workers, 141 counselors, and 132 community-based partners serving in our schools this school year. With a total of 641.5 mental health professionals in our schools every day, we exceed the national recommended ratio of 1 to 25 with a ratio of 1 to 22. This includes an increased investment of 33.5 school-based mental health providers and 26 additional community-based partners compared to last year. One example of what this looks like in practice is the work being led by the mental health team at Noyes Elementary School in collaboration with their community-based organization, Hillcrest Family Services. At Noyes, mental health staff are helping students strengthen coping skills and improve self-regulation through group work. They have also given attention to staff wellness by providing space for teachers to learn diaphragmatic breathing, a commonly used practice for regulating anxiety and coping with stress. At the secondary level, the mental health team at Sousa Middle School, inclusive of their community-based partner organization SMILE, strategically integrate social and emotional learning as a daily practice. With recovery in mind, school mental health providers facilitated 3 sessions per day on a specific social emotional topic. SOSA's commitment to dedicating time for building relational trust and skill building is a great example of Tier 1 mental health prevention at work. DCPS also intentionally allocates academic and social emotional learning supports through ESSER funding of school-led acceleration academies. For example, Cardozo Educational Campus created a summer acceleration academy that allows students to have access to academic curriculum and interest areas such as soccer, theater, martial arts, cooking, gardening, and mentoring. Moton Elementary School launched a new Saturday Academy to support students in literacy, as well as to engage families in meaningful social emotional supports. The Saturday Academy is a prime example of integrating family engagement with partner collaboration. Partners like DC Scores, AARP, Kennedy Center, Literacy Lab, Horton's Kids, Community of Hope, and others are critical in this work. We know students need targeted academic interventions, but we also know the heightened importance of joy in creating a safe and welcoming environment as students grapple with the traumatic impact of the pandemic. In classrooms across the district, we are focused on ensuring our students develop the skills to resolve conflict on their own or in small groups. Each day, our mental health providers coach students on self-regulation strategies, journaling, and other more formal therapies to focus on positive responses to life challenges. This summer, we practice these same techniques and wellness breaks with our school leadership teams so that they are equipped with skills from our mental health staff. This summer, 276 DCPS staff from 89 schools, including deans, restorative justice coordinators, in-school suspension coordinators, behavior techs, and educational aides, attended a 3-day virtual conference to increase their capacity to support positive student behavior as we return fully to in-person learning. The training provided guidance on the implementation of restorative practices as a proactive and reactive approach, LGBTQ+ competencies, targeted violence assessments, bully prevention, and supporting our students with disabilities, crisis prevention intervention through verbal de-escalation, and the science of stress aversity learning and development. As a result of this capacity building work, we have seen an increase in using restorative practices to resolve challenges by more than 20% this school compared to school year 1920. This year, DCPS launched our Youth Mental Health Ambassador program at all high schools. This peer-led intervention aims to remove the stigma associated with seeking help. By partnering with Our Minds Matter, student ambassadors are trained to recognize signs of distress so that they can help refer their peers to school mental health providers. As we continue to recover from the pandemic, elevating the voices of our students will ensure that programming is relevant to and informed by their expressed needs. Reimagining school security. DCPS continues to reimagine school security by grounding our focus in what our students, staff, and families share. Since November 2020, DCPS has heard from more than 500 stakeholders and established a spring 2021 Safe and Positive Schools Working Group. We are honored to be doing this work alongside students, families, and community members from organizations such as Georgetown's Juvenile Justice Initiative, SHAPE, and Black Swan Academy. As a result of the working group feedback, in collaboration with our schools and community, we are prioritizing reducing negative experiences with school security for students, particularly students of color, and aligning school security practices with DCPS's overall approach to supporting students' growth and development. We're also focused on ensuring that all adults in our schools understand the role of school security. As we heard in the spring testimony, many of our contract school security personnel take pride in building relational trust with students and being fully integrated into the school community. This summer, DCPS supported this work by providing over 30 hours of professional development to our contract security officers. We have leveraged the expertise of restorative practices and student behavior specialists and other DCPS staff to lead our officers through training and verbal de-escalation, restorative practices, and cultural competency. DCPS is in the process of reviewing our security contract and reimagining how we can best meet the safety and security needs of our students. We've also made an investment in building a stronger partnership with the School Safety Division, SSD, of MPD, and inviting school resource officers, SROs, to attend training facilitated by our DCPS subject matter experts. This summer, MPD's SROs joined our contract officers in attendance at our School Culture and Climate Student Behavior Conference. We also shared last spring that several secondary schools are piloting innovations to reimagine school safety in their building by reallocating funds away from traditional contract security and increasing access to social emotional resources. 18 schools across all 8 wards applied and are participating in the revisioning school security pilot. We are starting to analyze the results of this shift which moved approximately $2 million from security to cultural and social emotional support. And in reviewing initial feedback of the pilot, one school leader shared that they could see the shift in the mindset of their staff due to increased training opportunities. Another shared that the shift in resources allowed them to be more intentional about training their school-based staff and developing guards using a strength-based approach. As of October 29th, out-of-school suspension in pilot schools for school year 2021 totaled 234, which is a 51.5% decrease from school year 1920, where the total was 484. Our goal continues to be ensuring our schools are safe and nurturing environments where students develop positive and trusting relationships. We're so happy to have our students back in school, but every day we see the impact that this pandemic and time away from school has had on our students' emotional well-being. Our strategic investments to implement our multi-tiered systems of support, expand mental health resources, and provide innovative opportunities to revision school security are key to ensuring that all students feel a strong sense of belonging in our schools and have the resources to support them as they navigate the immense challenges of this current time. We are thankful for the partnership across the city, partnerships across the city in ensuring safety in our schools, from our incredible teachers and school leaders to the security and law enforcement personnel in our community. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have at this time. I'm sorry, I think you're on mute.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Let me begin by asking some questions about the contract. My understanding is that the contract is in its final option year.
That is correct, but if you have other contract questions, I'd love to invite one of my colleagues to join us.
Well, I do have two questions. One is, last October, Patrick Davis testified on behalf of DCPS when I asked him if DCPS would consider bringing the function in-house. He said, we will look at it. So I kind of want to know whether DCPS is looking at that. And my other question is, what's the status if you're not bringing it in-house with negotiating a new contract?
Sure. I think Cynthia Ruiz, who is our interim chief of operations, she actually is fulfilling the role formerly held by Patrick Davis, is waiting to be to join us and could, give you some more insight to that.
I'm looking at the man behind the curtain. Could you repeat the name?
Cynthia Ruiz. Or Ricky Brown as well, if you don't see Cynthia, but I think she's there.
Yes.
Good afternoon, Chairman. Good afternoon, Dr. Elliott.
Good afternoon. You are the interim chief operating officer?
That's correct.
Okay. Did you hear my questions?
I did. The first question I think you mentioned, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that Patrick Davis mentioned that we would look into potentially shifting from a contract to have that in-house, which is a really good question. We considered many moving pieces related to the contract. At this time, we do feel that as we are reimagining what security looks like, we are going to move forward with a contract, but take it into consideration all of the moving pieces of the things that we're looking for related to safe and positive schools, related to SEL, and some of our restorative practices.
So it's still on the table, but at the moment you're proceeding with a new contract.
That's correct.
And what's the status of that?
Sure. So we've started to have our internal conversations with key stakeholders to figure out, again, I mentioned in re-envisioning and reimagining the contract, knowing that our focus is a little bit different. The contract that was originally, created years ago just has a different perspective, different approach. We've been actively speaking with key members here at DCPS, including Dr. Elliott's team, MPD, and internally the operations team to figure out what are the key components of what we're looking for and how do we make sure that when we do bid that our contractor or vendor is aligned to where we are in terms of re-envisioning safe and positive schools.
So can you give me a timeline?
Sure.
Remember correctly, the contract expires next summer.
Correct, in July.
Mhm.
So within the next month or two, January, February, we will start with the bidding process.
So the solicitation will go out in January or February.
That's correct.
And that would have a 30-day, 60-day return.
That's correct.
Do you know if it would be 30 or 60?
I'm not 100% sure, but I can get confirmation on that if it's 30 or 60.
So at the latest, you would be getting the bids the end of April, which would
That's
give
right.
you then,
April, May.
Well, let me suggest before May. In fact, let me even suggest before April, because you have to then score them, make a decision, and then put the package together and get it to the council for us to approve before the new contract period.
That's correct. And I'm sorry, more of a finalized approach to submit something to you all by April.
But again, it's not out of the question, maybe for next year, not, but thereafter, it's not out of the question that this might be brought in-house.
Not necessarily. I think we are just considering many moving pieces right now, including the pandemic, staffing concerns, being able to have support. There are union considerations. There are just a lot of moving pieces. But right now, our focus is to ensure that the contract is aligned to where we are in terms of safe and positive schools, with SEL supports and re-envisioning what it means to have guards in our schools and how they are supporting our initiatives and the day-to-day work that the principals even mentioned earlier.
Okay. Let me ask about staffing for monitoring the contract. I don't know if that's you, Ms. Ruiz, or Ms. Elliott.
Sure. Still me.
How many staff do you have who are handling the contract?
Sure. So we have 2 internally, and then we have 3 MPD detailed staff members. So 5 in total.
Now, my notes from a year ago say, what do they say? The DCPS was hiring a director of contract monitoring and security.
That's correct. And that has been filled. The vacancy is filled. That's Director Ricky Brown.
And that MPD had detailed 3 people, which I believe was Janice Sullivan and 2 monitors.
So that's correct, except Janice is actually no longer a part of this particular contract. She still is within MPD. There's 3 separate staff members that are still detailed to DCPS to help with the contract.
And are they monitors or do they do something else?
Yes, they monitor.
Because my notes were 2 monitors, 1 administrative support, 1 financial person for a total of 5. That's Janice, 2 monitors, 1 administrative support, 1 financial.
My understanding is there is the 2 who are monitoring, and then the 3rd is supporting with the financial aspect with Director Ricky Brown.
So how many monitors do you have total? You have 5 people. How many are monitors?
2. And those are the MPD detail staff members.
And then, so what do the two DCPS people do?
Sure, more of the day-to-day request, whether it's deployment or there's a special activity or there's a emergency at the school level that we need to provide additional supports and connecting our school-based staff with additional either security, operational, or MPD supports.
So you have two monitors, two people who work with day-to-day requests, and one person who does some financial, some administrative support.
That's correct.
And my notes from a year ago were that there should be 4 monitors, not 2. So do you feel like you're adequately strengthened there?
I think that's a really good question. We're still, again, this is like our full year back in person with everybody back in our buildings. We're definitely using this time to reconsider, evaluate, and to make sure that we have the necessary staffing in place.
How many contract security personnel are there overall? Security officers are there?
There are roughly around 313 in our schools.
So that's a little bit less than a year ago.
Well, a year ago, we had actually less because we were in the pandemic hybrid posture, but from school year 1920, that's correct.
Yeah, I can't remember whose testimony. I think it was Patrick Davis said there were 330. So that was October 2020. In any event, your testimony is that there's 330, about 313 now.
That's correct.
Now, who would be the right person to ask about incidents? Like how many weapons have been confiscated this year to date compared to last year, or 2018, 2019, the last full year? What type of weapons? Do you have that data, and who could answer that question?
We can both answer it. We do have that data. If you could just give me 1 second to pull it up.
I'll go ahead and jump in, Cynthia,
Sure,
while
go ahead.
you're getting some additional data. So when we're looking at our last year that we were in school in person fully with all of our students, year to date, we had 58 incidents involving a weapon. So for us in DCPS, we kind of distinguish between weapons and firearms. So when we're talking about weapons, we're talking about anything other than a firearm. Year to date this year, when we look in our incident reporting tool, we see 30 incidents where principals have reported to us that a weapon has been found in their school.
I thought you said 58.
58 was the last year we were in school full time, which would have been school year 1920. And then this current school year, 21-22, year to date, we have had 30 incidents so far.
So that was 58 for the entire year.
No. I'm talking when I'm, we're thinking
Okay.
apples to apples with the same year to date data. If we talk about the entire school year for school year 1920, there was a total of 126 incidents for that entire year.
Now you said for weapons, and you said weapons is not the same as firearms. So were there firearms incidents?
So for this school year, we have not had any incidents of a firearm being reported in our school for this school year, as of the data that we collected for the hearing, which would have been as of October 29th. And I believe that is still true. When we look at the data for school year 1920, there were 3 firearms that were found in our school during that school year.
Okay. I have a slightly different question. How many security incidents, such as fights, requiring a security officer have occurred this year to date. Would you have that data?
No, sir, I would not have, I mean, maybe Cynthia does. You're saying that involved a security officer, Cynthia would.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think a clarifying question. Do you mean an MPD security officer or a contract security guard?
contract.
Well, because they are a part of our day-to-day school operations, if there is an incident at the school level, they may have to respond to either, be of a presence and things of that nature. In every incident that occurs at the school level, a contract security guard is responsible for submitting a incident report. So in theory, in general, they respond to every incident because they're required to submit an incident report. It's different in terms of MPD security SROs, and that is separate. And we don't actually have how many times MPD has been called into a school to address, because it just depends on the scenario and how school leaders are submitting that information.
Okay, but so do you know how many incident reports have been filed this year? That would be different than how many incidents involving a weapon.
That's correct, because it's for every incident. We've had a roughly 110 incident reports submitted this school year.
And then you have DCPS special police officers?
Right. So the DC police officers are part of our day-to-day. They really truly do help with our school operations and provide a supplemental staff when in an event there's an emergency and MPD is not able to support. They help with access. They monitor our school buildings overnight during the weekend. They provide special attention to our athletic games during nights and during the weekend as well.
And how many special DCPS special police officers do you have?
16. Across 3 shifts, just to clarify that piece of it.
So that's 16 total.
Correct.
So if every shift was the same, that would be roughly 5 or 6 per shift.
Roughly.
So let me ask this. I have some general questions. Training. I think I saw in Ms. Elliott's testimony, it's a reference to 30 hours of training.
Yeah, that was actually additional training that we provided our contract security guards, the DCPS police, and we've invited MPD SROs as well.
So my understanding is that from testimony at the previous hearings was that every contract security officer receives 40 hours of basic training conducted by the security vendor and supplemental training aligned with DCPS focus on school culture. So is that 40 hours still being provided and then it's the 30 on top of that?
That is correct. I will lean on Sam to provide additional context here, but in this posture with COVID, they've had to waive those 40 hours based on technology, just meeting in person, technology concerns, but we have continued to provide the additional supplemental training, professional development related to culture and climate.
Tell me, why again was the 40 hours of basic training waived?
It's, from my understanding, due to COVID limitations.
Why shouldn't that be a concern? Training is always important.
It is very much important, why we've also continued on to provide our supplemental training. We are working with Sam to ensure that this training, the 40-hour trainings, happens this school year during the month of April, when there will be time for security guards not to be in our building as how we need them now during our spring break time.
So your testimony is that the 40 hours hasn't been done yet, but it will be
For
done.
this school year, during April 2022.
Have there been other changes? I know Ms. Elliott spoke to some generally. Other changes made with regard to school security? We just talked about training, fewer metal detectors, other big picture changes.
I think those are it. I think, again, we continue to work with our school leaders, our key stakeholders, the culture and climate team that Dr. Elliott leads, just to make sure that we're collaborating and working together to ensure that what we are re-envisioning is aligned in support of our students. I think Dr. Elliott can speak a little bit more about some of our other initiatives that our schools are truly a part of and have been participating in as we reallocated some funding, but the major changes with the contract security guards you just referenced.
Yeah. Ms. Elliott, did you want to add anything since Ms. Ruiz sort of invited you to?
No, I think the testimony was pretty comprehensive. I say that, but then I would add that we have spent a lot of time with our revisioning safe and supportive schools, thinking about like what are some next steps, what's happening across the nation, what we should consider moving forward. In the additional investments that we're making in restorative practices is one of the key things that we're really leaning in. When we think about the 18 schools and the 18 schools and the pilot that actually revisioned their security, we had 6 of them that hired a total of 9 restorative practices coordinators. So we have those schools that are really leaning in this idea of how do we restore the harm that has happened in our school community as a result of disciplinary offenses. So how do we both think about the young person who has done the harm to the community and what is necessary for that young person to restore the harm to the community, but also how do we now invite that young person fully and include that young person fully and with open arms back to our school community after that harm has been done. So the restorative approach that we're taking is comprehensive. It's not just about the one-on-one mediations, but it is about impacting the entire culture of the school so that we're doing restorative circles in every classroom in these pilot schools in the morning with students, building relationships across difference and those things that help the students and the staff and others in the school community feel like that they are a family and that they have a strong sense of responsibility and connection to one another. To me, I think that's one of the most exciting things to me about the work that we're doing with regards to that. And then finally, I would speak to the work that we're doing to become a whole child centered anti-racist school district, where we're really leaning in on helping our adults understand the impact of trauma and adversity on the brain and how it impacts young people's ability to learn deeply, but also to form strong, lasting relationships. And so we're leaning on that with every person in our school building. And we believe that those practices, like it can't just be a strategy around school security. It has to be a strategy about every adult in the building and their interactions with students, as well as to Principal Hayes' point, how we're really approaching this from a strength standpoint of understanding like all of our children in their communities have lots of assets and lots of value, and that they want to create a great school within their communities, and really leaning in that in our work.
I do want to say, I should have said this earlier, I thought it was very helpful to have the 2 principals testify. But the 18 schools was a pilot last year. The impression I have, but I want to be clear on this, is that the changes they made with regard to staffing, they'll be able to continue. Is that correct?
That is correct. Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
like where Hardy took $58,000 in savings. I think that's what he said.
Mhm.
He doesn't have to worry about losing that. He'll be able to continue with that person on his payroll.
That is correct.
But what about increasing the number of schools? The impression I got is that a year ago, ECPS said invited schools to volunteer to do this, and you got 18 schools. Is that it, or are we going to try to increase the number?
Well, we're really studying that. We have, like, some anecdotal data from our principals, particularly with this being our first full year back. And we really want to study it and make sure that we really actually get the impact that we believe we're going to get from this before we think about expanding it. Already, if we're just comparing year to date, again, I would emphasize that we've seen across the 18 pilot schools a 50% reduction in the use of out-of-school suspension for discipline infractions. So we feel like in first term, we've seen, some positive trend data. We're hearing a lot of positive feedback from our schools, but really want to give it an opportunity to have almost a full school year before we start thinking about, like, what's the next iteration of this.
I have to say that listening to the two principals, I think what impressed me was as much their enthusiasm for what they thought was the positive impact. I don't know that they talked about fewer incidents. Maybe, but it seemed to be, they thought there was just a positive impact regardless.
Well, the thing about the two principals that testified, these are two principals that very infrequently use out-of-school suspension. So, I mean, like, they were not schools that really leaned on out-of-school suspension as a consequence for behavior. But many of the other schools in the pilot did, and that's where we're seeing significant decreases. So going from across those pilot schools, going from the 484 suspensions to down to 240 suspensions. So there's been a significant decrease across them, but Anacostia and Hardy, since they were not using suspension early, the last year we were in school, like, that's not really been a key strategy. They've not really seen it show up in their suspension data the way that other schools have seen it show up.
Yeah, but I think that still makes my point that there are other positive benefits to.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I'm sorry. I'm
flexibility.
agreeing with you. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So let me see, Ms. Elliott, you also testified that this year there are 131 and a half. I'm not quite sure how you have half a psychologist. 200
Part-time.
social workers. Yeah, I kind of knew I was joking. 141 counselors and 132 something else, the community-based providers. That's actually an increase over a year ago. Is that temporary or will that be sustained?
It will be sustained, or it's planned to be sustained in our upcoming budget. I would note that the community-based providers are part of the mayor's mental health expansion. And so now that work is fully funded, where we have a full-time community-based provider in every one of our schools to really serve as somewhat of conduit to pull together all the mental health resources and make the connection between mental health supports that are provided on a daily basis in the school, as well as those resources that are available in the community. And so we're super excited that we have the full implementation of that across schools. Again, that's been a 4-year investment where we started with the schools that had the highest percentage of students with critical needs, but now that is in place in each one of our schools.
So you testified that we exceed, I can't remember if you said the national average or the national standard.
Yeah, so I believe it's the national average, but according to the National Association of School Psychologists, that is what they believe is the standard. And so let me make a correction. That is the national standard and not the national average. So that is what the National Association is asking that schools and recommending that schools and school districts strive to reach, that 1 to 22.
So do we stop or do we continue to increase some of these supports?
Well, we're continuing to explore it. We are, certainly looking at a model where we can be sure that there is equitable funding with regards to our mental health needs based on the needs of the students in each population. Right now, I will say honestly, there is a national shortage of school psychologists, and we have struggled the last couple of years to actually hire sufficiently based on our vacancies. So we're not starting at all. We're not stopping at all of continuing to increase the resources. But I think one of the things we're striving to do is to diversify the resources as well as to provide training so that even a teacher has, some skills and knowledge around how do we support students in trauma, like how do we address stress and adversity, how do we help calm the brain, those things that all of us actually need in order to increase our emotional well-being.
So I'm looking at the testimony from the Children's Law Center today. Their recommendations included increased investments in the school-based behavioral health program. And we've just talked about that, and that has increased.
Yes, sir.
We talked about expand restorative justice programming in schools. And while I'm not hearing that that's universal, you did testify that there's more of that happening. But then they also testified, provide teachers and staff with trauma-informed training, professional development, and support. So is that happening?
Yes, as I mentioned in my testimony, a year ago, we launched our trauma responsive schools 5 non-negotiables, and we did our year-long training series through our lead coaches at each individual school to help teachers actually build their capacity in those trauma responsive practices. And so we're continuing to do that work. Again, this year we've expanded that work to really think about the whole child anti-racist approach to this with a focus on addressing adversity and stress. So we're continuing to build on that work and build the expertise of our entire force. So not just those mental health providers, but our teachers, our deans, our school, our ISS coordinators, school climate specialists, everyone has a role in helping to improve climate in our schools.
So this training is for all teachers?
Yes, so the series that we did through LEAP for trauma responsive practices was co-facilitated by our school psychologists at each school and their LEAP lead at each school. And it was training for the school staff, everybody in the staff. And there's also, monthly training that we do with our mental health providers, our social workers, psychologists, counselors. They meet on a monthly basis. We've implemented, we have implemented and purchased a number of additional evidence-based treatments that support stress and adversity that our mental health providers are getting training on that help them to have this, the skills and resources to really support students both in Tier 1, but also our students with critical needs.
So at previous hearings, we had testimony about how there ought to be more violence interrupters at schools, and Children's Law Center in their testimony said explore funding the expansion of credible messengers in communities and schools. So is DCPS doing that?
So I don't think we are funding critical messengers. Cynthia, do you have any context around that? I do know what they are, and I know that they are a valued resource in many of our schools. They support with things such as safe passage, but I want to toss it to my colleague here to see what she would like to add.
I think that's it, Dr. Elliott. We are working with MPD and some of our partners specifically towards safe passage, but we are not funding additional work in our schools.
Okay. A year ago, or last spring, there was testimony about this Safe and Positive Schools Working Group, and Ms. Elliott, I think you touched on that in your statement. So where is the report from that working group?
Well, we have a couple of presentations for that work group that, we have, shared internal to our organization. We have not issued a final report. Still, so we launched the work group and we've launched a couple of initiatives and pilots this year. What we'd like to wait to do and see is actually have some proof points for the things that we believe are most important actually work. That will give us the information that we would need to be able to really stamp like key components of a model moving forward. So, we had anticipated actually having like a final model that we could stamp in, in July when we first initiated this, but would like to at least have one full semester of the key things that we had studied and started to implement before we actually land on the model. So we do anticipate in the spring being able to issue some summary of the work that group has, as well as their recommendations, pending final endorsement and approval from our leadership.
Well, it seems to me this is relevant to the contract, and the contract is going to go out on the street in January or February. So
yeah, we have some initial things I think that will influence the contract, but I do want to just say that the working group has actually thought bigger than just revisioning school security. They have actually talked about revisioning safe and positive schools. So the umbrella for the working group is much larger than just the work around school security, because we're talking about not just school security, but about every adult, every system in a school. How is that reinforcing that we love our children and we want them to be in school. At the same time, we want to support them in being safe. We want them to have the skills, and we to have implement the resources to address trauma. So it's more holistically the plan of the working group, but we do have some initial thoughts that that we have been, I would say, sharing with our operations team that manages the contract. But I do want to say that members of the operations team, including Director Brown, have been part of the working group, have been very invested in working alongside of it. So he is also able to see those ideas and strategies that would be important for us to think in terms of when we're working on that contract. So, this summer when we plan the 3-day conference that the contracted security participated, Director Brown worked hand in hand with our team in deciding what were the key things that we knew that our security officers needed to have competencies in order to be fully invested in our school communities and to be able to do their jobs from a restorative strength-based model. So, those are a couple of the ideas and things that we've thought about, really having those officers really understand a restorative justice approach, understand a threat of violence assessment that we do in school. All of those key things, not only trainings, but also the skill set that we would want to look into for our officers in the tasks that we would want them to be engaged in our schools. So all of that, his team and Cynthia's team have had direct insight to that work.
See, my ears perked up when I heard plan, because council members love to see plans and see actually something that we're working toward or working, I want to say working against. So I'm looking at this from previous hearings. DCPS established a safe and positive schools working group. This group, composed of 20 internal and external stakeholders, includes students, parents, community representatives, district and school-based staff, and has a charge to lead the development of a multi-year plan. See, that's the plan. That's what I perked up on. Development of a multi-year plan for re-envisioning school security and student discipline in DCPS. The team will meet monthly through June to complete research, review feedback, and propose comprehensive solutions. Working group is on target to provide recommendations later in 2021. So now what I'm hearing from you is there might not actually be a final report.
No, sir, there will be a final report. I was saying we wanted to have a semester where kids are in the building with the pilots that we have recommended before we actually issue that final plan. And the thinking behind that is that we don't, we're coming up with a 3-year plan, like, pretty clear of what we want to see happen, where we want to invest. And we didn't want to, we wanted to be thoughtful about that so that we would actually have some data on the implementation of those strategies prior to actually saying like we're sure this is the process. So yes, a 3-year plan is still the goal. However, we wanted to have this actual additional semester of actually seeing those practices in place, and now plan to have the plan in early spring.
Okay, so what does early spring mean? Does that mean March 23rd? Because that's early spring, or does that mean the spring ends in June?
We would like it early. Well, our plan for the plan is early spring, because certainly we want to be able to influence schools and the district to be thinking about in our budget those investments that we are recommending. So early spring. But I want to say, we have a number of DCPS team members that, as they're already thinking about their budget for the upcoming year, there are shifts that they're making based on their participation and knowledge of the working group.
So the best I'm going to get out of you is early spring.
Yes, sir.
Let me just see if I have any other questions. Hold on. I just checked with staff. I don't have any other questions for you all. Thank you for your time and for your testimony. And I do have to say that, or maybe I don't have to, but we had a hearing, what, 6 months ago, and there were over 30 witnesses. So I'm not quite sure what to take from this, whether folks are concerns about security have calmed down or what. But I think this has been helpful. As we are, I mean, even though the contract is with you now and no longer with MPD, I still view it as a transitioning to a new way of approaching security in our schools. So thank you again for your testimony. As I said at the beginning, the record in this for this hearing will be open for 2 weeks. Which means that it will close at 5 p.m. on Tuesday, November 23rd. The time is now 12:53 in the afternoon, and this hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for the opportunity. Take good care.